Okay, it's Kurt Thompson again. Kurt Thompson here with story time for Music History 101. Oh yes, time to stretch. Go check all the lights, turn them off. Check your doors. Check the coffee maker to make sure it's unplugged. To make sure the oven's off. And get all snuggly and get ready to really go for a nice snooze in dreamland. Meanwhile, your host, Kurt Thompson, will be drinking some very nice Starbucks coffee. As we continue along the path of music history, we're now up to the mid to late 1600s with Henry Purcell. Some stodgy professors at universities might call him Henry Purcell. So you can just be rest assured that depending on what university you go to, one will call it Purcell and one will call it Purcell. Okay, so he was born in 1659. Let's see. This is kind of long, actually, so I'm not going to go through all this. Let's skip down a little bit. We're going to skip through some of this stuff. It's a long one, so we're going to move it up a little bit here. Okay, keep moving and keep moving. Okay. So Henry Purcell was made a gentleman of the Chapel Royale, where he sang alto and bass. He was also worked for the king. He made a lot of the king's instruments and other things. And later he was made the organist at Westminster Abbey. So to give you an idea about him. Let's see here. Purcell was generally well paid for the various duties he performed for the king, which included composing music for coronations, weddings, and birthdays, and the comings and goings of important personages. He was always being pestered to write departing or returning odes. Sometimes he wished they'd just go away and leave him alone. He'd also composed odes to St. Cecilia, the patroness of music. He thought it might bring him luck, and he was right. Even though he was often paid out of secret service funds, that doesn't necessarily mean he was a spy. One historian has said that in the last few years of his life, music for the theater continued to flow from Purcell's pen. We can picture him seated at his desk, with his pen overflowing with pieces of blank manuscript paper scattered around to soak up the mess, hoping that at least some of it will be legible enough to be used in the Diocletian or the Fairy Queen. Here's a picture of Purcell with music flowing from his pen. This author here really has an interesting sense of humor. Okay, I think we'll turn it over here and see what else he says about Henry Purcell. In addition, as long as Queen Mary continued to have birthdays, Purcell was obliged to compose birthday odes for her. Finally, she said she'd had enough and died. To show her how grateful he was, Purcell wrote the funeral music for Queen Mary. This included several anthems accompanied by flat, mournful trumpets. Whether the trumpets were flat because they were mournful or mournful because they were flat, we were not told. Perhaps they were lamenting the fact that they are not trumpets at all but trombones, and no one likes to have his name wrong in the program. At any rate, just to show that you can never be too sure that you aren't going to need some musical piece again, Purcell died the very next year. The same music was played at his own funeral, although no one ever thinks of calling it the funeral music for Henry Purcell. That is bizarre. You compose something for the queen that just died, and a little bit later, a year or two later, you die and they play the same music you composed. At any rate, just to show that you can never be too sure that you aren't going to need some piece of music again. Okay, I already read that part. He died on November 21st, 1695, the eve of St. Cecilia's Day. Some think Purcell was embarrassed that he hadn't completed an ode for that year, and dying was the only excuse he could think of. Another legend about his death tells us that he came home late one night after having a few drinks with the boys. His wife refused to let him in, whereupon he caught pneumonia and died. It's a great story, but it wasn't Purcell. It was Maurice Greene. Greene was a fine composer, but he has little enough to make him memorable, and it seems unfair to rob him of his one moment of glory. We know it can't have been Purcell because intensive research has shown that November of that year had been particularly mild. That's the trouble with musicology. Some smart aleck is always digging up weather reports and spoiling the fun. So Maurice Greene, who was a composer of little note, died of pneumonia because his wife wouldn't let him in. Interesting. Okay, folks, so that's Henry Purcell, and we're gonna go broke. Broke as in baroque, not broke as in no money. So, kids, trying to wake up a little bit, go ahead and reach over there and turn off your table lamp, and then go back to sleepy time and get all snuggly. And join me next time for another adventure in Music History 101 and story time telling. Good night.